Spring is finally here, and I'm so glad because I've been able to go out and take photos. In the past week itself, I went out probably 4 days out of the week. So right now what I want to do is share some of the things that I'm looking out for photos in springtime. And what I really want to emphasize is that some of those things are actually very ephemeral, meaning that they will disappear pretty quickly. The environment, the atmosphere will change pretty quickly, and you might not be able to get those conditions for a long time. I've broken it down into 3 different sections of different levels of urgency, depending on how long I expect those conditions to last. So if you really want to go out and take photos right now, at this very moment, I suggest skipping to the last section so you can see the different conditions that are in the really urgent section and try to find those and make use of them right now. Hi everyone, for those of you who are new to this channel, my name is Wase. I'm a full-time engineer and amateur landscape photographer. Alright, let's get into this, starting off with the things that I think you have plenty of time for but probably should start to look out for now as well. And the first thing that's on that list is actually lush forests. As winter recedes and we get more into spring, you'll start to see a lot more leaves on the trees, which tended to be very dead and barren throughout winter. And so what this means is you'll have a lot more separation between the different trees and create really nice woodland photography photos that you might not have been able to do as easily during winter. So let's take a look at some of the photos and see what I'm talking about. So for this photo, for example, you can see that the trees and the branches are the subject of this image. And because there's so much greenery everywhere really, we are able to at least distinguish between different branches and different parts of the trees. And having that separation between the branches is what creates such an aesthetic photo, as opposed to just noise. We have really contrasting tree trunks over here, over here, over here, and because everything else is green, those tree trunks really stand out a lot more than they would if it was winter. And the reason this photo works so well is because of that separation between the different tree trunks. Now, this type of scene you might continue to see into the summer, but it will start to play out a lot more, and you might be able to see the different levels of separations and the different tonalities in the leaves if you start taking photos right now and then continue to do so of the same scene into summer. Again, very simple scene over here where the trunks are separated, and because we have enough greenery between them, they are easily distinguishable from everything else. So really pleasant image, very simple but really powerful. So for this image, we can tell that the main subject of this image is the bridge over here, but because everything else is green, your eyes are really drawn to the places where there's a lack of greenery, basically the bridge and the different trees. And so that makes it so that you're able to easily distinguish the different elements and creates a much more pleasing photo. Imagine if the scene didn't have any of those green leaves. You would basically be met with brown everywhere, and the bridge would just blend in too well with that. It wouldn't be able to stand out against all the greenery that it can over here. Using the lush forest and the leaves to create the separation between the different elements will become a really powerful way to take photos as we move into warmer and warmer weather. But because the leaves are expected to grow and last even until summer, you probably have plenty of time to take photos like this. Alright, moving on to the next item that I have for this segment where you have plenty of time to take these types of photos is photos with birds. As we move into spring, you'll see a lot more birds which are migrating and flying, and so they can really help you create a much more holistic photo which might have been missing that one special element. This photo has really nice tones and the trees are really distinct. You can see it as they're contrasting against the background, but without the birds, this place would just have been a very empty space. But with the birds, you add a little bit more energy to the photo and you fill up that space as well, so your eyes are drawn to the entire photo rather than just sticking to the bottom trees and missing all the space above, which would have ended up being too much space if it was just the trees. Similarly with this photo that I took of the Empire State Building. Now, the building itself is really nice against the sunset glow, but the space above and around the buildings are just too empty. There's nothing too interesting happening with the sky. With the birds though, it adds a lot more interest to the photo and again, a lot more energy to the photo. If the birds weren't there, it still might be a good photo, but with the addition of the birds, it makes for a much more pleasant photo. And then finally this image. Although the subject of this photo is the boathouse in the back, and I've used golden hour to create a really nice glow on the boathouse itself, the birds just complete the image because they do add a lot more energy to this photo. Otherwise, I fear that the photo would become out of balance because there's just too much density of things in the bottom half, right? So there's the boat, there's the boathouse, there's another ship, etc. So there's a lot of things going on in the bottom half, and you really need something to draw your interest to the top as well. And so as you see more and more birds flying around, and you have space that you need to fill with interesting elements, remember to look out for birds, but also remember to adjust your shutter speed to be able to capture the movement that you want. Alright, for the last item in this segment, I think it's really important to know that as leaves start to grow, what can you actually do with it? And one of my most favorite things to look forward to is side lighting. Side lighting just creates this magical glow on the things that it's actually interacting with. And let me show you how it distinguishes from just normal lighting. So in this photo right here, what we have is just a tree, half dead, half alive, but it's lit up by light, which is everywhere. You see light hitting the ground floor, you see light hitting these leaves, and although the leaves themselves are glowing a lot, they don't stand out as much as they could. So let's see what happens when we have side lighting, which also creates more shadows. Now with the side lighting, because the tree is positioned in a certain space, shadows start to fall on the ground. We also don't see any of the light in the background, and so it's able to stand out against the background, creating this really nice magical glow effect. And so if the tree was barren like we would see in winter, we wouldn't see any of those leaves being hit by light because there would be no leaves. But as leaves start to grow, you'll start to see a lot more areas where light is just hitting it from the side and creating really nice effect on the leaves where everything else might have shadows around it. So this is another image that I took just by driving down my neighborhood. And these leaves during daytime didn't really stand out that much, but during early hours when the sun is just rising, because the light was hitting from one direction, there were no harsh shadows, but the light hitting the leaves created this really nice effect where they started to shine a lot more. And so you'll still be able to get this side lighting effect from spring into summer, but you will need to look out for those locations and those timings when that light would actually be effective. All right, let's move on to segment number 2, which are a list of things that I think you really need to start looking out for right now, because it's likely that those conditions might start to disappear. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is wildflowers. Now flowers will start to bloom in spring, but because of the heat that comes with summer, you'll start to see them wilt a lot more. And right now is the best time to take photos of these wildflowers as they're blooming and to think about how you might want to compose them, because there are different ways to use them, right? And so I'll just go over a few photos of mine that I think work well. I really like this photo because it was taken during the early hours when there wasn't a lot of harsh lighting. Because of the soft lighting, I was able to make some of the colors in those flowers stand out against the leaves around them. Really enjoy the different colors in play. I will admit though that I still am trying to edit this a little bit better to make it really pop, make it really stand out, but not oversaturate the image. This is a very simple composition. I'm basically using the color of the flowers to stand out against the green background, which is just the grass itself. So simple compositions, but I think it becomes highly effective. Now this is a photo that I actually took last year in early summer, and as time progressed into summer, I wasn't able to find similar sorts of plants, similar sorts of, I guess, budding flowers. I don't even know what to call it, but I found this really neat, interesting, unique plant, and I found a way to compose it against the moon. Now the extra bugs on there though were something that I didn't anticipate, but I'm really glad it worked out. I think it's pretty cute. All right, let's move on to the next item, which revolves around the presence of rain, but also brown leaves from winter. Because there's still an abundance of brown leaves on the floor and they haven't been covered by greenery everywhere, I think this is the best time when you have a lot more rain coming in, which will really saturate those brown colors and put them against the greenery and the flowers that is starting to come up. This is a photo that I took actually on one of those outings that I mentioned in the past week. Originally, I was looking at compositions of the flowers, but then I realized that the leaves were actually standing out a lot more to me, and I found them to be much more aesthetically pleasing. And so here, I've tried to compose the leaves in such a way where they're separated with the different greenery and they stand out individually. But because of the rain, they become a lot more saturated. In a couple of months, this field would likely be just green, and I wouldn't be able to find these leaves as easily anyway. All right, so the final item for this semi-urgent list requires you to know about your seasonal local changes. What I mean by this is, what are things that are happening around you, not just in nature, but related to the landscape in general, which are seasonal. Because I live in areas with a lot of farmland, you will start to see the farm area start to change. The field landscape will start to change, and the colors of those landscapes will also start to change, creating nice striations, especially as the field gets plowed, as crops are planted, and as they grow as well. But that is something to look out for because that is a little bit time sensitive. Crop fields might not look the same week to week. So in this photo, the crops are still pretty small, so I'm still able to get the contrasting striations of the field itself, and the hills at the back are a lot more green rather than brown or orange, which I would have seen in the winter instead. Again, the crops and grass here are still pretty small, and so I'm able to find those striations, those nice patterns, that nice texture that makes it such a pleasing photo. And as the crops start to grow, especially like this photo that I took in early summer last year, you'll start to see a lot more texture appear. You might still be able to find those patterns, But as the crops grow on more and more, you have to also realize that they might extend the height of your camera if you're using a camera, and you might not be able to actually take the photos that you want here. So I actually came back to this field a few weeks later, and I wasn't able to recreate an image like this, even if the light had changed, because the crops had just grown so high. All right, so now let's move on to the things that I think are pretty urgent, because I don't think those conditions will appear very easily throughout spring or in summer. So you really have to go out and take these photos now. So the first thing, and if you're not new to this channel, you'll probably realize, is fog. Now there's different ways that fog might appear, but one of the main things is that fog appears when there is enough humidity in the air and the temperature of the air is cool enough that the water droplets start to form and create fog instead. And as the weather is changing from winter to spring, we're starting to see more rain, but we also have temperatures which are still pretty low in the early mornings. And so that's the best time to actually start seeing a lot more fog. I actually think that there's going to be more fog later this weekend, so I'm planning to go out again. In the past week, 2 of the days that I went out were actually days when there were fog. And fog, as you might know, really creates a very atmospheric effect where it's able to isolate and simplify the image and the different elements in the image, because you're able to create the separation between the background noise that you might not want to see and the foreground and midground elements that you actually want to have interest in. So for example, here, right? It's still early spring, so there's not a lot of leaves to create separation, but because there's enough fog, we can create that separation between the back trees and the front trees and really make this little island with those trees stand out a lot more. Again, here, because of the fog, I'm able to really capture just the essence of the trees in the back. Because of the fog, I'm able to really create that contrast between the duck and the mid-ground island and the trees, as well as any trees in the back. All right, so the next item I think is even more short-lived than fog, and that's mist. Mist is a little bit different than fog, and where I'm really attracted to mist is on top of the water. So sometimes you'll see mist which is floating right on top of the water, which creates this really nice effect where you think that the water is actually steaming. And this happens for very similar reasons to fog as well. The water is still cold, but as temperatures start to rise in the day, the water starts to evaporate. But because there's still a lot of humidity above the water, it'll still remain as mist. So for example, over here, this little geese floating in the water as the sun is shining, you can see that there are different spots over here, for example, where the mist is a little bit thin, over here where the mist is a little bit dense. And because the sun is still at a low angle, when it shines on those water droplets, it creates a really nice warm glow effect. Even though I think I would like to have seen more in this photo, I think there's just not enough to capture the attention. The atmosphere in this photo is still amazing. In this photo, for example, you can see where the mist is a little less dense in the water and a little bit more dense. And again, side lighting of the sun onto the mist really creates the atmospheric conditions for this scene to stand out. Without the mist, it might have been an okay photo. With that mist interacting with the light, it creates a really beautiful photo. And then finally for this image, you can see the level of the mist floating slightly above the water, making it seem as if the water is actually boiling over, where in actuality the water is pretty cold. It's just the heat is starting to create this dense layer of mini fog, I would say, above it, but really enhances the photo and really makes the elements like this island over here and these islands in the back stand out. Without this mist, this island in the front and the island in the midground might not have been able to stand out against one another as easily, and it might not have created such a captivating photo just by itself. All right, for the final item in this list, where I think you really need to go out and take these photos now because they won't last, is speckled trees. Let's go over what I actually mean by that. As the leaves are growing, you will find different areas around the trees which have the leaves and which don't have the leaves. And you can then create a really nice contrasting effect because you have those little dots of color separated by the branches and by whatever is behind them. Let's take a look at this photo right here. We see that the main subject of this photo is the big sycamore tree, the white tree, but there's lots of speckled leaves in the background and in the foreground, and it really ties the photo together. It also creates a little bit more separation between the different trees and make this seem like an oil painting instead. All right, so for this photo, you can easily see that the yellow flowers, leaves, I actually don't even know what those were, aren't very dense. And so you don't find clumps of them. You're still able to see the forest in the back. You're still able to see the trunks pretty vividly. But if you look at the whole image, you'll see that there are distinct elements, which are the trunks. And then it's as if someone just sprinkled over different drops of color onto the photo. Again, for this photo, we have very distinct tree trunks, but imagine if there were no leaves at all, right? Those tree trunks and the branches would kind of get lost in one another. And then imagine if there were leaves everywhere. Sure, we might see some of the trunks, but it would become very uniform. There would be big blobs of green everywhere. And so at this moment, when it's not yet fully spring, you start to see a little sprinkle of leaves growing in different locations. Over here, they kind of blend with the branches a little bit, but they might not last as long as the leaves start to become more green and become more dense as well. That's it for my list, and I highly recommend going out and taking the photo because these conditions are not going to last very long, and to create unique photos of your local landscapes. Alright, thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, remember to leave it a thumbs up, and if you've not already subscribed, remember to do that as well. If you have any ideas of how you utilize spring for your photography, remember to leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.